Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to today's lecture on ecosystem. In the last lectures, we have studied about different components that are present in an ecosystem, out of which we studied about organisms and population. Today's lecture, we will learn about ecosystem. Ecosystem, what is ecosystem? Ecosystem is a functional unit of nature where living organisms like biotic organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. So basically, it is a functional unit of nature where both the biotic and abiotic components interact with each other. And the study of this ecosystem is known as ecology. So in this ecosystem, the biotic components may interact among themselves as we see in case of population of a similar species, or they may also interact with the population of other species and their surrounding physical environment. Like they may have an interaction with the physical, like their survival or their habitat or niche depend on their physical environment, that is the abiotic factors that are present in their surroundings. So ecosystem varies greatly in size. For example, a small pond may also be considered as an ecosystem since it fulfills all the aspects that is required to be called as an ecosystem. That is, even in a small pond, there might be some organisms that are present that may be interacting among themselves, and there is the presence of physical environment, that is the water. Water is basically the abiotic component that is present in the pond, and many small fishes or the many small fish, zooplanktons, that is the and small animals that live in the ponds, or phytoplanktons, small plants that grow in pond. So basically, they may interact among themselves and therefore create a small ecosystem. While the ecosystem may be very large, for example, a large forest or a large sea. So it is not like that the ecosystem is limited in size. It may vary greatly. As I mentioned, that from a small pond to a large forest area. Even the entire biosphere also acts as a global ecosystem as a composite of, it can be considered as a composite of all local systems on the earth. So this entire biosphere is also considered as a global ecosystem by the various ecologists. So this entire biosphere may be considered as a composite of very small local ecosystems. For example, it will comprise of all the pond, large forest, sea, and the total entity together will be called as the biosphere. But for the sake of convenience to study and to understand what is an ecosystem, the complete ecosystem is divided, like we have divided basically it into the two categories. The first one is the terrestrial and the second one is the aquatic. So terrestrial means the one on the land, aquatic means the one on the water. So just to understand what is an ecosystem, therefore we have just divided the ecosystem for the sake of convenience, for the sake of study, we have divided into two basic categories to make you understand that what actually is an ecosystem and how different components interact within an ecosystem. So terrestrial is the one where the interaction is taking place on the land. Aquatic is the one where the interaction or the ecosystem comprises of water. So ecosystems can also be divided into the types based on whether they are naturally present or they have been created artificially by the humans. So ecosystem may be divided into the natural ecosystem or the artificial ecosystem. The natural ecosystem may be aquatic, that is on the water, or the terrestrial on the land. So aquatic water ecosystem or the aquatic natural ecosystem may be further divided into different types, like there may be a freshwater ecosystem or there may be a marine aquatic natural ecosystem. Freshwater ecosystem may further be divided into lantic, that include the ponds and the lakes, lotic, that includes the rivers and the streams, wetlands, that include the marshes and the swamps. The marine ecosystem may further be divided into three types: open oceans, upwelling regions, and the coastal areas. For example, the coral reefs, mangroves, or the estuaries. So this was about the aquatic natural ecosystem. Then artificial ecosystem may also comprise of an aquatic artificial ecosystem. For example, we have an aquarium. Suppose, so we brought an aquarium and we have an aquarium in which the fish lives, we provide them with the food, and there is complete ecosystem environment that we have provided there. So this aquarium is an artificial aquatic ecosystem. Now, there is another type of ecosystem, as I mentioned, the terrestrial ecosystem. So, natural terrestrial ecosystem includes grasslands, desert, and forest. So, these ecosystems are naturally present in the environment, while artificial terrestrial ecosystem may include the farmlands or the croplands in which we humans cultivate a particular type of crop as per our convenience. And therefore, the ecosystem is artificial. So this is how the ecosystem can be classified broadly. So the ecosystem is broadly classified into two types. The first one is the natural, the second one is the artificial ecosystem. And I also mentioned some of the examples that for artificial ecosystem, aquarium may be an example. For natural ecosystem, it may be coastal areas, it may be grasslands, desert, or the forest. Now, what are the components of the ecosystem that comprises of the ecosystem or that makes up an ecosystem? So, an ecosystem is basically, as I mentioned, is the interaction between the abiotic and the biotic component. And therefore, the abiotic and the interaction between the abiotic, that is the non-physical, and the physical components results in a structure that is a characteristic for each type of ecosystem. So for every ecosystem, for every different type of ecosystem, the characteristic features of that ecosystem depends on the interaction of the biotic and the abiotic components that are actually present in that ecosystem. The identification and the enumeration means counting. So the identification and enumeration of the plants and animal species of an ecosystem tells us about its species composition, that what are the species that are present in any particular ecosystem. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is known as the stratification. So there is a level of stratification that may, like if I divide the different species according to the different levels, the process is known as the stratification. So the vertical distribution of different species occupying different levels is called the stratification. This is a very important term. So for example, this is a structure of rainforest that from ground, that is from the forest floor to the top at where the even above the canopy, which is known as the emergent layer, there is a differences in the height of the plants. So if I talk about different species that might be present in the emergent layer to the ones that are present in the forest floor, this classification, this vertical classification is known as the stratification. For example, at the top, we may have emergent layer, below which we have canopy layer, then we have understory, which is known as the shrub, or then we have forest floor where small grasses or the herbs are present. So these different species occupy different levels in an ecosystem based on their we may say that based on their height or based on their height, basically based on the height of these trees, we have classified this ecosystem. The species have been classified, and this distribution, they have been divided vertically, and this vertical distribution is known as the stratification. So this is the stratification or the strata, and each layer of this of this division is known as the strata. So each layer of this stratification system is known as the strata. So emergent layer, for example, is one of the strata. Then we have canopy layers, and then we have understory shrub layers, or then we have forest floors. So this is an example of vertical stratification in a rainforest. So the components of the ecosystem are seen to function as a unit because they interact among themselves and among each other, like with each other. So they have to function as a unit. And why they function as a unit under the following aspects. First is productivity, the second is decomposition, third one is energy flow, and the fourth is nutrient cycling. So we, in ecosystem chapter, we will learn about all of these: productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycle. So productivity tells us about how much is produced by the producers and how much decomposition, and then it is transferred to the other levels, is told by the energy flow. That is how the energy from one trophic level is transferred to the organisms that are present at another trophic level. Decomposition is basically the degradation of the organic material, and therefore it releases the inorganic nutrients again for the that are available again for the uptake. Nutrient cycling is basically the cycling of the nutrients in the environment or in any ecosystem. So we will learn about this productivity, decomposition, energy flow, nutrient cycling one by one in today's lecture and in the next lectures as well. So starting with so before proceeding further, I would first like to give you an example of pond as an ecosystem, which is described well in an NCRT as well, that they have considered pond, like the pond, as we know, is an ecosystem. So this small pond, so how this small pond is described as an ecosystem? So this small pond has both abiotic and biotic factors that interact among themselves. So firstly, the abiotic factor that is present in the pond is water. So basically the water is the abiotic factor that is present in the pond. Now there are various biotic factors that are also present in the ponds. For example, we have zooplanktons, we have phytoplanktons, so we have fish that may be present, and we may have some secondary consumers at the higher levels as well. So these organisms form the biotic components of a pond. Now in this ecosystem or in this pond, basically these organisms, that is the producers, interact, like these organisms, both biotic and abiotic components, interact among themselves and with the physical environment, that is with the water. And therefore this system is can be completely referred to as an ecosystem. Also we can see that in the pond, beside the producers and the consumers, we also have decomposers that decompose the organic material and supply it back into the water. So this is how the ecosystem works. Basically in plants we have phytoplanktons, that is the primary producers. Now we have small animals which are known as primary consumers of the zooplanktons. Now these primary consumers are then eaten up by the small fishes which are known as the secondary consumer. Then we have large fish that may eat up these small fish, or the secondary, or the fish that are present at the secondary consumer level, forming a tertiary consumer, becoming a tertiary consumer. These decomposers finally decomposes the organic material that is present in the environment. So this is how the pond may be considered as an ecosystem. So despite being very small in size, the pond has fulfills all the aspects of being an ecosystem. So if I repeat it again, so the abiotic component is the water that has all the dissolved inorganic and organic substances that is actually required by the biotic components. And the biotic component, and there are various factors that may affect the productivity in any pond. For example, the pond has a supply of solar input by the sun. It has a cycle of temperature. It has a day and length cycle and other climatic conditions that regulate the rate of function of the entire pond. So these are the abiotic factors that are present in any pond. Now we have autotrophs. So autotrophs are the organisms that make up their own food. So the autotrophs component includes the phytoplanktons, minute floating planktons, or it may include the algae and submerged plants or the marginal plants that are present in the ponds or that are present at the edges of the ponds. So these are the primary consumers or primary producers. Now the consumers include the zooplanktons, that is the small animals that are present, free swimming, that may be free swimming, or they may be bottom dwelling, that is they may be present at the bottom of the pond. Now we have decomposers, so fungi, bacteria and flagellates, especially that are abundant at the bottom of the pond, act as decomposers that decomposes the organic material, and the system therefore performs all the activities which are required to be called as an ecosystem, because in the system all the biotic and abiotic components are interacting among themselves, and therefore ecosystem is forming a unit and can be considered as an therefore the pond is forming a unit of abiotic interaction where the interaction between the abiotic and biotic components take place, and therefore this pond can be considered as an ecosystem. So basically, if this ecosystem like this pond performs all the function, like all the activities of ecosystem, that is, it also helps in the conversion of inorganic or organic material with the help of the radiant energy that is provided by the sun. Now consumption of the autotrophs by the heterotrophs takes place. Decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter is performed by the decomposers that help in releasing them back for rescue by the reuse by the autotrophs. Now these events are repeated over and over again, and this unidirectional movement of energy towards the higher trophic levels and its dissipation and loss as heat to the environment. So basically, this is how an ecosystem works, and pond fulfills all the criteria of being an ecosystem. So this is just a representative example and an overview of how a ecosystem actually works. So the very first aspect of any ecosystem is the productivity. So the productivity of any ecosystem depends on the producers and its consumers. So for the productivity, a constant input of solar energy is required, and it is a basic requirement for any ecosystem to function and sustain, because we know that without the light or without the solar energy, life would be difficult. Life would not be possible actually. So primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or the organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plants during the photosynthesis. So basically the productivity or the production is divided into two types, the primary production and the secondary production. So primary production, as the name suggests, is the one that is the amount of the biomass or the organic material that is produced per unit area over a time by plants during the photosynthesis. So we know that during the process of photosynthesis, the inorganic materials are converted into the organic glucose, and which is taken up by the higher organisms of higher trophic levels. So primary production is actually the amount of biomass or the organic matter that is produced per unit area over a time period by plants during photosynthesis. So since we talk about the amount of biomass, or we talk about the organic matter that is produced per unit area, therefore it may be expressed in terms of gram per meter square or energy per meter square, that is kilocalories per meter square or calories per meter square. The rate of biomass production is called its productivity. So how rapidly this production or this conversion of inorganic materials to organic material by the process of photosynthesis is how fast or how slow this production of biomass takes place defines the productivity of any ecosystem. So the rate of biomass production is called its productivity. And therefore, since in the productivity we talk about the rate, that is, rate means time period. Therefore, we may express productivity as gram per meter square per year or kilocalorie per meter square per year to compare the productivity of two different ecosystems. So suppose if I want to compare the productivity of two different ecosystems, what I will look into. So I would look into the amount of biomass or the organic matter that is produced by one ecosystem in a particular time period. That let us consider that as year. So how much of biomass or the organic matter is produced by the plants in ecosystem 1 in 1 year versus how much of the biomass or the organic matter is produced by the plants of the ecosystem 2 in 1 year. So by comparing these values of these, we may define that which one is having a higher productivity. So this basically the productivity, which is the rate of production of biomass, is used for the comparison of productivity of two different ecosystems. So the productivity is further divided into gross primary productivity and the net primary productivity. Gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. And a considerable amount of gross primary productivity, which is presented by GPP here, is utilized by plants in the respiration. So basically, plants are also living organisms and therefore they also respire. So during the process of respiration, some amount of energy will be utilized by the plants itself. So they will not be able to. So actually the exact or the net productivity of the plants is less as compared to the gross primary productivity. So gross primary productivity is the complete productivity or the rate of the production of organic matter during the process of photosynthesis. But out of that, some amount of energy or the some amount of this production, gross primary production basically is utilized by the plants for their process, for their metabolism, that is for the respiration, and therefore resulting in the loss of some amount of productivity that which some amount of production which is the net primary productivity. So this gross primary productivity minus the respiration loss is actually the net primary productivity of any plant. We may say that it's a net primary productivity of any ecosystem. So net primary productivity is actually the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs, that is the herbivores and the decomposers. Because out of all the organic matter that has been synthesized by the plants during the process of photosynthesis, some of the organic matter is utilized by the plant itself, and therefore for herbivores and for the decomposers, the amount or the available biomass decreases, and this decrease due to the loss of respiration or this respiration loss is known as the so the gross primary productivity minus the respiration loss is known as the net primary productivity of the plants, or we may say net primary productivity of any ecosystem. So as I mentioned that there are two types of productivity, primary and secondary. So secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers. So the herbivores are dependent on the plants, so they take up the now how much of what is the rate of formation of new organic matter in the consumers is known as the secondary productivity. So primary productivity is defined by basically the producers of any ecosystem, and secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers of any ecosystem. So as I mentioned, net primary productivity, which is actually the amount of the biomass that is taken up by the herbivores or the decomposers from the primary producers is known as the net primary productivity, and it is equal to gross primary productivity minus the respiration losses. So if I take the example of, if I take this example, so glucose will be produced during the photosynthesis. So the amount of glucose may be the productivity of that plant, and this may be known as the gross primary production. Now, this glucose is now utilized by the plants itself also. So some of the glucose which is used to supply the energy to drive cellular processes inside the plant, that is in the process of respiration, will be used up, while the remaining glucose that is available to be laid down as new material, which is known as the biomass, is known as the net primary production. So what are the factors on which this productivity depends? So the primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. So what are the different plant species that inhabit a particular area? What is the rate of photosynthesis by that plant? All of these affects the primary productivity. Now, beside biotic factors, there are certain abiotic factors like environmental factors, for example, the availability of light, availability of nutrients in the soil, availability of water. All these factors also affect the productivity or the primary productivity of any plant of any particular area by affecting the photosynthetic capability of the plants. So, therefore, we can say that the primary productivity depend on the environmental factors like soil, water, temperature, availability of nutrients, and the photosynthetic capability of the plants. Therefore, it varies in different types of ecosystem, making it a characteristic of a particular ecosystem. Some ecosystem may have a higher production rate of or may have a higher primary productivity as compared to the other ecosystem. So the annual net primary productivity, for example, of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons. If I talk in the dry weight, if I talk about of the dry weight of organic matter. So this is an approximate amount or approximate value of the net primary productivity of the whole biosphere. Of this, despite occupying about 70% of the surface, the productivity of the oceans are only 55 billion tons. So this example actually shows that the productivity or the primary productivity also depends on the photosynthetic capability of the plants. We may see that the primary productivity or the annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere is 170 billion tons. Now we know that most of the portion of the earth, that is around 70% of the earth, is covered with water. So what we may expect is that out of this 170 billion tons of the biomass or the organic matter that is produced per year, basically the productivity should be higher in the in the ocean or in the water surface. But actually, despite the fact that about 70% of the surface of the earth is covered with water, they only contribute to 55 billion tons. So the productivity of oceans are only 55 billion tons. So the next aspect of, so this was the first aspect of ecosystem in which we learn about productivity. What is a productivity? How productivity is expressed? So productivity, firstly we learn about production. Production is the amount of the biomass that is produced per unit area. So gram per meter square, or if I talk in terms of energy, kilocalorie per meter square. This is important. Now, then we talk about the productivity, which is the rate of biomass production. So obviously rate means time period. So since in this we talk about the production in particular time period, so we divide the productivity with the time period. So productivity is therefore expressed as gram per meter square per year. And this is used to compare the productivity of two different ecosystems. Then we talk about what is gross primary productivity, total biomass that is produced. minus the and the net primary productivity, which is actually equals to which is actually gross primary productivity minus the respiration losses. Then we talk about the secondary productivity, which is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers and the factors that affects the productivity of the plants, that is the environmental factors, nutrients, photosynthetic capability, etc. The next aspect of any ecosystem is the decomposition. So decomposition is the breakdown of complex. So the production involves the formation of a complex organic molecule, while decomposition is opposite to production and it involves the breakdown of the complex organic matter into the inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients. So basically, and the organisms that perform this decomposition are known as decomposers. So decomposers break down organic complex material into the inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients. And this is how these inorganic substances again enter into the environment. So this process is known as the decomposition. So we know, we have seen that if we are walking into a garden or if we are walking towards from the roadside itself and we have plants present there, we may find that there are some dead plant remains that such as leaves, bark, flowers, and dead remains of animals, including fecal matter, detritus, raw material. These fecal matter, detritus, leaves, bark, flowers, etc., or the dead remains of plants and animals constitute the major raw material for the decomposition. Decomposition, the cycle of decomposition is divided into 5 different steps. The first one is the fragmentation, the second is leaching, third is catabolism, fourth is humification, fifth is mineralization. So we will learn about each of these steps one by one, giving us an idea about how the decomposition is performed by the decomposers. So decomposers mainly includes the bacteria that may decompose the organic material into the inorganic substances, and thereby it releases the different inorganic components like carbon dioxide, water, etc., nutrients into the environment again. So this cycle is therefore very important as this. So decomposition is therefore also very important for the fact that it again releases the nutrients back into the environment, which can be taken up by the plants again and therefore can be fixed again by the plants into the organic matter, which can further be utilized by the consumers or the herbivores or the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So the examples of and the organisms that perform this process of decomposition, as I mentioned, are known as decomposers. And decomposers mainly feed on dead materials of plants and animals that forms the major raw material for the decomposition. Bacteria, fungus, invertebrates may decompose the organic material and by following the process of decomposition. So talking about what is fragmentation, so detritivores, that is detritivores, example earthworm, they break down the detritus, that is the fecal material or the dead plants and animals, into the smaller parts, and this process is known as the fragmentation. Fragmentation is simply the process of forming smaller fragments of the organic material. So basically, example include the detritivores that feed up on the soil or the dead organic plants and materials, and therefore they fragment or they fragment these organic materials that may be further decomposed into smaller particles. The second is leaching. So the leaching is the process. So by the process of leaching, once these dead remains are broken down, it may constitute of some organic material and some inorganic material. So basically, by the process of leaching, water soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as unavailable salt. So basically, leaching is the step where the loss of some amount of inorganic nutrients may take up from this cycle. The third process is catabolism, where the bacterial and fungal enzymes of the the enzymes of the decomposers degrade the detritus into simpler organic substances, and the process is known as the catabolism. The next is known as the humification. So humification, as the name suggests, humification and mineralization occur during the decomposition in the soil. Humification leads to the accumulation of dark amorphous substance, which is called as the humus. And this humus is actually highly resistant to microbial action, and it undergoes decomposition at an extremely low rate. So basically, most of the organic material is converted into a dark organic matter, which is the humus. And this humus is actually rich in nutrients, inorganic nutrients, and this is very resistant to microbial action and undergo decomposition at an extremely low or slow rate. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir of nutrients. Hence, the soil that contains high percentage of humus is actually very nutrient rich. So you might have seen that the alluvium soil, which is dark colored in and consists of large amount of humus, is basically richer in nutrients because the colloidal nature of humus allows the allows it to act as a reservoir of nutrients, and therefore humus contains the high amount of nutrient and present in the soil, making it nutrient rich. The last step is the mineralization. So upon microbial degradation, this humus is further degraded by some microbes and release of organic nutrients occur by the process which is known as the mineralization. So these are the 5 different steps that are involved in decomposition where that involves fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. So this is a diagrammatic representation of trophic levels in any ecosystem. So we may consider a tree that is growing in the soil. A green leaf falls to the ground. Now some are eaten by the insects and the other animals. Nutrients and energy enter into the food web. Now some nutrients leach into the soil by the chemical action, and the leaves partially consumed by decomposers such as fungi and bacteria, they begin to lose form and become litter. Further decomposition by earthworm, bacteria, soil mites, etc. make it organic rich soil. This organic rich soil or the nutrient rich soil is then helps the tree to grow in again, like it helps in providing the nutrients to the plants. So this is a diagrammatic representation of trophic levels in any ecosystem and how different organisms are dependent on each other. So decomposition of basically decomposition which requires the breakdown of organic materials into the inorganic nutrients is largely an oxygen requiring process, and it requires a large amount of oxygen. The rate of decomposition is controlled by the chemical composition of the detritus. That what is the chemical composition of detritus, and the climatic factors that allows the effective catabolism or the degradation of organic material decomposition by the microbes. A particular climatic condition, decomposition rate may be slow. Detritus is rich in lignin because it takes more time to degrade lignin, and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugars. Temperature and soil moistures are obviously one of the most important climatic factors that actually regulate the decomposition by affecting the activities of the soil microbes. We know that every organism, the enzymes of every organism has functions optimally at a particular temperature and pH. Therefore, the temperature and the condition of the soil affects the climatic factors affects the activities of the soil microbes. The warm and moist environment favors decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobiosis inhibit decomposition. As I mentioned, the decomposition is largely a oxygen requiring process. Therefore, the lower levels of oxygen in any environment inhibits the decomposition. While if I talk about the warm and moist environment, which favors the growth of microorganism, it also favors the decomposition. Whereas the organic material builds up in the conditions where the temperature is low and the conditions are usually anaerobic. This aspect of ecosystem is known as decomposition. Firstly, we understand how production takes place, what is the productivity. Then we learn about decomposition, that involves 5 steps of fragmentation, leaching, catabolism, humification, and mineralization. Then we study the factors on which the decomposition depends. So decomposition is an organic process, it's largely oxygen dependent, therefore takes place faster where the conditions are warm and moist and oxygen is present. It also depends on the temperature of the soil and the moisture of the soil, and in any particular climatic condition, decomposition rate is slower if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin, and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and water soluble substances like sugars. The next aspect about which, so today I will only give a brief introduction about energy flow, but we will learn about energy flow in the next class in details. So the energy which is produced by the producers at the primary level of the at the first trophic level has to be transferred from one level to the another level. So there are 4 trophic levels that are present in, like there may be more. So depending on the different layers, or we may say that depending on the producers and the type of consumers that are present in any ecosystem, the energy flow takes place. For example, the producers are the one that produces the energy, or that captures or harnesses the energy. So this energy from the producers is transferred to the primary consumers through eating up of the plants or the plant materials. So these primary consumers may include herbivores, and by eating these herbivores, the secondary consumers like the carnivores get the energy. So these secondary consumers may include the carnivores that feeds upon the smaller animals or the herbivores. Next, we have from these secondary consumers some of the larger animals, like for example, vulture or hawk or lion. If I talk about a forest ecosystem, they may act as a tertiary consumers that feeds up further upon the smaller animals to take up the energy. So this is how the flow of energy takes place. But we know that the flow of energy is not, so the flow of energy is always unidirectional. It will always takes place from the level of producers or the first trophic level to the next trophic level. That is the first trophic level to the second trophic level, then to the third, and then to the fourth trophic level, which is the top carnivore level. So the producers may include the phytoplanktons, grass, trees, etc. The primary consumers may include zooplanktons, grasshopper, and cow. The secondary consumers may include the birds and fishes. The tertiary consumer, the fourth level, trophic level, or the tertiary consumers may include the man or the lion, depending upon the ecosystem. As I mentioned, that the flow of energy is always unidirectional. Therefore, the flow of energy will always take place from the from the producers to the primary consumers to the secondary consumers and then to the tertiary consumers. Also, it is in the later class or in the next class, we will learn that during this flow of energy, the energy that is transferred from one trophic level to the next trophic level is not constant. There is obviously some loss in the transfer of the while the energy is getting transferred, because some of the energy will be required by the organisms that are present at each trophic level, and only the remaining one will be transferred to the next level. So there is a law which is the 10% law of energy transfer, and this law states that when we move from one trophic level to the another trophic level, there is a loss in the 10% of the energy. So that is, suppose if the producers produce the 10,000 joules of energy, then the all of its energy will not be transferred to the primary consumer, as we know that some of the energy will be required by the plant itself. So only the 10% of the energy will be transferred. That is, from this 10,000, only 1,000 joules of energy will be transferred to the primary consumers. Now, if I talk about the transfer of energy to secondary consumers, so considering the 10% of this 1,000 joules, we may calculate that the amount of energy that will be transferred to the secondary consumers is only the 100 joules. Then we have the organisms at the tertiary level. So the transfer of energy will be the 10% of 100. That is the 10% of 1,000. That is only the 100 joules. So this is how every time there is a loss in the energy, and all of the energy is not transferred to the next trophic level. So this is and that is why it is preferred that an ecosystem, that the stability of an ecosystem also depends on the number of trophic levels it has. As more the trophic levels, the energy which will be available for the topmost organisms that are present at that trophic level will be very less. So suppose if we have one more layer of trophic level here, then it will be just 10 joules of energy that will be transferred. So this is a very less amount of energy as compared to the one that is produced by the producers. So therefore, since there is a loss of energy at every trophic level, it is preferred that a stable ecosystem should have limited trophic level, so that the flow of energy and the energy which will be available at each trophic level should remain should be sufficient enough for the organisms that are present at that trophic level. So with this, I would like to end today's session. Thank you all.